I've been reborn. Yes, you heard that right. Reborn. And in this new life, I'll make sure my daughter-in-law finally learns how the law of karma truly works. Join me in today's video as I begin this new chapter of justice and payback. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious to know where my dear listeners are tuning in from around the world. And don't hesitate, hit subscribe, give this video a like, and stay with me as we dive into the story that proves karma never forgets. The sound of the waves was the last thing I heard before everything went black. That morning, Madeline had smiled too sweetly. She said we needed a fresh start, that a short cruise could heal the distance between us. I wanted to believe her. I even put on the blue scarf she gave me for Christmas. When she asked me to stand by the railing for a picture, I felt the wind against my face, cold but freeing. Then her hand touched my back. It wasn't gentle. A sudden push, a flash of sky, and then the taste of salt and fear filled my mouth. The water swallowed me whole before I could even scream. I remember the shock, the weight of my clothes dragging me down, the muffled roar of the engine fading. When I woke, I was on a small fishing boat. The man who saved me said he found me floating near the rocks, clinging to a piece of wood. He looked at me with pity when I couldn't remember my name. For days, I drifted between sleep and confusion until it all came back, the cruise, the smile, the shove. My own daughter-in-law had tried to kill me. Later, when I could walk again, I saw my face on a local newspaper at the dock cafe. "Beloved woman lost at sea," the headline said. There was a photo of Madeline crying in black, holding Felix's hand. My son looked hollow, broken. The article said I had no surviving family except them, and that all my assets, house, car savings, had been transferred to Felix's name before my death. I knew Madeline had planned every step. I went back to the fisherman's small cottage and sat by the window for hours staring at the horizon. The sea looked calm again, but I could still feel the cold hands of the waves. I was supposed to be dead, buried under the ocean, forgotten. Instead, I was alive, and I suddenly knew what survival truly meant. It wasn't just about breathing again. It was about remembering who pushed me and deciding what to do with that truth. I wasn't always the woman who fell off a yacht and came back from the sea. Before all that, I was Camille Prescott, known around Charleston's fine dining world as the Iron Lady of the Coast. I spent 30 years managing a restaurant that overlooked the harbor. I demanded perfection. The napkins folded sharp. The sauces simmered exactly 5 minutes, the wine served at just the right temperature. My staff feared me a little, but they respected me more. When I finally retired, they gave me a brass compass engraved with the words, "To the one who never lost direction." I laughed, not knowing how much irony those words would carry one day. After retirement, I bought a small cedar house near the beach, just far enough from town to hear the ocean, but not the traffic. My days were quiet and carefully measured. I baked bread for my neighbors on Sundays, read law guides about retirement planning, and tended to my hydrangeas. Some called me disciplined. The truth is, I just didn't like depending on anyone. My Seaview retirement fund grew slowly but steadily. Every penny in it was mine, earned from double shifts and missed holidays. I often told myself, freedom doesn't come from wealth. It comes from owing nothing to anyone. Behind that calm life, there were scars I rarely showed. Richard, my husband of 25 years, left me for his secretary when I was 49. He promised to keep in touch to send support. None of that happened. The divorce was quiet, but humiliating. I learned then that charm fades fast when money enters the picture. Since that day, I built walls, polished ones made of patience and caution. Sometimes at night, I'd sit on my porch and watch the tide crawl in, remembering how he used to hold my hand during storms. The sea always reflected my own contradictions serene above turbulent below. People said I became too strict, too proud. Maybe they were right. But I would rather be alone than be someone's second choice again. By the time Felix married Madeline, I thought I had made peace with my past. I wanted to believe she loved him honestly. I ignored the little things, the way she glanced at my jewelry, her faint sigh when I mentioned my savings. I thought I was wiser now. But wisdom, I would later learn, isn't the same as safety. Felix was always the kind of boy who needed reassurance. Even when he was little, he would look to me before answering a question as if my nod could make him believe in himself. Now, at 36, he wears a chef's uniform in a 5-star hotel in downtown Charleston. Yet I still see the same hesitation in his eyes. He's gifted his food as art, but he doesn't know it. Cooking became his language of love, the way he proved his worth to a world that once made him feel small. He says I'm the reason he cooks so precisely, because I taught him that care shows in the details. I smile when he says that, but there's an ache behind my chest. I know where his self-doubt comes from. When he was 8, he saw Richard. His father kiss his secretary in the car outside the restaurant. I found him crying under the kitchen counter that night, clutching his toy spatula. Since then, he's always tried to fix broken people, as if saving someone else could make him whole again. He doesn't realize how that need makes him easy to manipulate. When Felix introduced me to Madeline, I wanted to believe she was different. She had soft manners, a gentle voice, and that practiced humility that made everyone around her comfortable. She told me she admired how I built my life after the divorce, how I stayed independent. I mistook flattery for respect. Even when she subtly directed conversations toward my savings or my home, I thought she was just curious. Looking back, it wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. Felix adored her from the start. He said she understood his dreams, that she believed in him more than anyone else ever had. I could see how her sweetness filled the gaps his father left. I didn't want to interfere. A mother can warn, but she cannot choose for her son. So I kept quiet, telling myself he needed to learn to trust again. I didn't know he was walking straight into the same kind of betrayal I once endured. At their wedding, I gave them a check from my retirement fund, a gesture of faith and love. Felix hugged me so tightly, that day his eyes wet with gratitude. Madeline whispered that she'd make sure he never forgot my kindness. I believed her. I didn't realize that the gift I handed over so proudly would become the key that unlocked her greed and the first step toward the nightmare waiting at sea. Madeline Fordham walked into my son's life like a summer storm, beautiful, dazzling, and just dangerous enough to make him forget where the ground was. She was a model, or so she said. Her face once graced the cover of a local magazine called Coastal Lifestyle. The photo was everywhere online, her smile wide, her hair caught perfectly in the wind. She looked like success itself. What no one saw was the truth, hiding behind those glossy pages, inconsistent paychecks, overdue credit cards, and a desperate need to keep up an image that was already cracking. She knew how to play every role flawlessly. Around Felix, she was soft and fragile, the kind of woman who needed protection. Around me, she became the caring daughter-in-law, always asking about my blood pressure, my knees, or whether I was eating enough greens. At first, I found her attentiveness sweet. I didn't realize her real interest was in my finances. Each gentle question, how much my pension covered, whether I managed my own savings, was a small dig disguised as concern. Her spending habits soon became a quiet storm in the background of their marriage. New handbags, weekly spa visits, and endless beauty procedures filled her calendar. When the bills caught up, she turned those tearful eyes toward Felix. He would call me late at night, apologizing, asking if I could lend them a little to get through a rough patch. I told myself it was just a phase that young couples always struggled at the start. I wanted to believe that love could make people responsible. But love, I would learn again, often makes us blind. One evening, I sat alone scrolling through my tablet and saw her post on social media. There she was, Madeline in a silk dress under golden light, raising a glass of champagne. The caption read, "To new beginnings with the best business partner." The man beside her was not my son. I knew him from town, wealthy, married the kind who wore loyalty like an accessory. My stomach turned as I noticed the diamond bracelet on her wrist glinting under the restaurant's chandelier. Felix could never afford that. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that there had to be an explanation. But in my heart I already knew. Madeline's sweetness was never love, it was strategy, and my son, just like his father once was, had fallen for a beautiful lie. After the wedding, Madeline insisted they move in with me. She smiled sweetly and said it was only temporary, that the apartment she shared with Felix was too small for her modeling equipment. "It'll be cozy, Mom," she said, calling me that for the first time. "We can help each other and save money." I wanted to believe she meant well. Felix worked long hours at the hotel, and part of me thought having her around would ease the loneliness that sometimes settled in my evenings. I didn't realize I was opening the door for my own erasure. Within a week, the house no longer felt like mine. She changed the curtains, replaced my simple beige ones with velvet gray drapes that swallowed the sunlight. My old oak dining table disappeared, replaced by something glass and cold. Every corner began to look like a page from a catalog. She said it was all for her brand, that followers wanted to see how a modern woman blends elegance with comfort. I became a background prop in her photos, the old lady who happened to be there while she posed with her coffee or held a cookbook she never opened. Felix was too busy to notice the small changes stacking up. When he came home late, Madeline wrapped her arms around him, whispering about how well we were getting along. He smiled, relieved. He wanted peace so badly that he didn't see how it had already left. When I tried to mention how I felt displaced, he said gently, "Mom, she's just trying to make the house feel like home. You two will understand each other soon." His voice was tired, hopeful, naive. Nights became the hardest. I'd sit in my room listening to the sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the artificial laughter echoing from her phone as she filmed yet another luxury life video in my living room, the same living room where I once hosted Christmas dinners and listened to Felix play the piano as a boy. Now it smelled of perfume and ring lights. The warmth was gone, replaced by something glossy and hollow. One evening, after she criticized the way I folded the towels for the background, I sat at my desk and opened a blank notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "Daily notes for my peace." I decided if I couldn't speak, I would write. Every sigh, every humiliation, every quiet moment of pretending I would trap them on paper before they drowned me completely. It started with a number 9, $800. A small red withdrawal line blinking on my tablet screen late one afternoon. I almost ignored it, thinking Felix might have made a payment for the restaurant. But something in my gut twisted. He had always been careful with money, almost painfully so. When I asked him about it later that evening, his confusion was genuine. "Mom, I haven't touched the joint account in months," he said, brows furrowed. "Maybe the bank made a mistake." But banks don't make that kind of mistake. People do. That night, when the house went quiet, I opened my laptop again. The date on the transaction burned into my eyes. I remembered the weather that morning, a drizzle, the kind of day when even seagulls stayed grounded. I decided to check the footage from the front camera, something I hadn't done in months. The recording loaded slowly, frame by frame, until I saw it. Madeline, wearing her beige coat and dark glasses, driving her silver SUV out of the driveway at 10:14 a.m. She was gone for 40 minutes, the exact window of the withdrawal. She returned with a paper envelope in her hand and a smile that made my stomach turn. I sat there for a long time staring at the paused frame. There was no more room for excuses. Every instinct I'd ignored now came rushing back sharp as glass. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something colder, heavier clarity. Later that night, as the waves crashed outside, I passed her room on the way to get water. The door to the bathroom was half open, steam curling out. Her voice floated through the air, low and deliberate. "Don't worry," she said softly into her phone. "Once she signs again, the house will be ours." There was a pause, a man's voice faint, but real on the other end. My fingers tightened around the glass. I walked back to my room without making a sound. My hands trembled slightly as I poured myself a glass of red wine, the first in years. The liquid caught the light deep and still, like blood under moonlight. Outside, the sea was calm again, too calm. I stared at it and whispered almost to myself, "If she thinks I'm weak, she picked the wrong woman." For the first time in a long while, I felt my heart beat steady, not from fear, but from purpose. Trust was gone, but in its place grew something sharper: resolve. It was close to midnight when the sound of running water woke me. At first, I thought it was the old pipes again, but then I heard laughter, low, breathy wrong. It came from the bathroom at the end of the hall. I slipped on my robe and walked quietly, the wooden floor cool under my bare feet. Through the thin door, I could hear her voice, Madeline's, laced with amusement. She wasn't talking to herself. Her tone changed sharper now, followed by the faint echo of a man's voice through her Bluetooth speaker. I leaned closer, holding my breath. "When she's gone," Madeline said softly, "the house will be ours. You just need to handle the inheritance paperwork." For a second, I couldn't move. The words sliced through the steam and silence, freezing me where I stood. My pulse hammered in my ears. I took out my phone, my hands trembling, and pressed record. Her voice carried again calm, calculating, the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who thinks they've already won. I held the phone closer to the doorframe, trying not to make a sound. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. As I shifted my weight, my elbow brushed against the edge of the wooden door. A faint creak echoed through the hallway. The sound was barely there, but it was enough. The laughter stopped. The running water ceased. Then came the silence, the kind that feels alive. The doorknob turned slowly. Steam poured out as the door opened. Madeline stood there in her silk robe, her hair damp, a phone still in her hand. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her eyes met mine through the haze, cold, unblinking, sharp enough to cut glass. I saw it then, the instant she understood. She knew I had heard everything. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure she could hear it. I forced a small smile, pretending I had only come for water. "Couldn't sleep," I murmured. Her lips curved into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Mother," she said softly, her voice smooth like ice. "It must be hard to rest when the house keeps such secrets." As she closed the door again, I felt my knees weaken. I clutched the phone in my hand like a weapon. The recording was still running, the red dot blinking faintly. In that moment, one thing became clear. This was no misunderstanding. I was living with someone who wanted me gone. The next morning, the house smelled of coffee and vanilla. When I came downstairs, Madeline was already in the kitchen, humming softly, wearing an apron I'd never seen before. The table was set neatly: eggs, pancakes, even a small vase of white lilies in the center. She turned and smiled, that perfect, practiced smile I had once mistaken for kindness. "Good morning, Mom," she said sweetly. I'm sorry if I made noise last night. I think I woke you up. Her voice was syrupy, careful, and light, as if the night before had never happened. The same mouth that whispered about my death was now asking if I wanted maple syrup or honey. I sat down slowly, my mind replaying every word I had recorded just hours earlier. She handed me a cup of coffee, her hand steady, her eyes calm, too calm. I thought we could start fresh, she said. Maybe go somewhere nice together, just us girls. A short trip, maybe the coast. It would be good for your nerves. Before I could respond, Felix appeared, still buttoning his shirt, surprised but delighted by the sight. Wow, this looks amazing, he said, kissing his wife on the cheek. You didn't have to do all this. She laughed softly, tilting her head just enough for the light to catch her hair. I just wanted to make things right. Your mother and I had a little misunderstanding, that's all. Felix's relief was almost painful to watch. He looked at us both, his eyes shining with hope. See, Mom? I told you she cares. You two are finally getting along. I forced a small smile, unwilling to break that fragile illusion. My son wanted peace so badly, he couldn't see the performance playing right in front of him. Madeline placed a fork in front of me, touching my shoulder lightly. We should go away for a few days, she said again. You and me. A little mother-daughter trip. You've done so much for us, you deserve to rest. Her words were honey, but I could taste the venom beneath. I ate in silence, letting her chatter fill the room. She spoke of beaches, resorts, new beginnings, all the while avoiding my gaze. I knew what this was, a setup dressed in silk and smiles. When Felix left for work, she gathered the plates, humming that same empty tune as if life had returned to normal. Later, I sat by the window, my notebook open. On the clean white page, I wrote, "When the enemy suddenly smiles, it means the storm is near." I underlined it twice. Then I closed the book and waited for the wind to shift. A few days later, I noticed something strange. My phone felt lighter, emptier somehow. When I opened it, the call history was blank. Every message, every recording gone. I scrolled through the folders again, thinking maybe I had pressed the wrong button. Then I opened the voice memo app. Where my saved file should have been, there was only a gray icon and the words, "No recordings found." My hands went cold. That recording, the proof of what I heard that night, had disappeared. I knew I hadn't deleted it. I had hidden it under an ordinary name, recipe notes to keep it safe. Only someone who knew my passwords could have erased it. That's when it hit me. Madeline. She must have accessed my iCloud account. She'd done it cleanly, quietly, like someone removing fingerprints from a crime scene. I sat there staring at the blank screen, the emptiness staring back at me like an open threat. That evening when Felix came home, I tried to tell him. "Someone deleted my files," I said carefully. "The recording I told you about, it's gone." He barely looked up from his phone. "Mom, maybe you forgot to save it. You've been under a lot of stress lately." His voice was kind but distant, the tone people use when they're talking to a child. My chest tightened. "Felix." "I didn't forget," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She's been inside my account." He sighed, shaking his head. "Please don't start this again. Madeline wouldn't do that. She's been trying so hard." In that moment, I saw it clearly, the gentle spell she had woven around him. My son, the boy who once asked me how to tell right from wrong, now looked at me as if I were the problem. I wanted to scream, but instead I nodded and said nothing. It was useless. He was already lost in her story. Later that week, as the sky dimmed to a dull orange, I passed by the study and heard Madeline's voice. She was on the phone, tone low but sharp, the way people speak when they're used to giving orders. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll get her out of my life permanently." The pause that followed was long and deliberate. Then the faint sound of a man's voice answered, muffled but approving. I stood frozen in the hallway, the light from the window falling across my face. My pulse thudded in my ears. The danger wasn't just suspicion anymore, it had become real breathing alive in my own house. A week later, Madeline came into the kitchen holding 2 glossy tickets. She waved them in the air like a magician revealing a trick. "Surprise," she said brightly. "A late birthday gift for you. A short cruise, just 2 days and 1 night on the coastal dream. You deserve something special, Mom." Her voice was warm, her smile effortless, too effortless. I stared at the tickets, the ocean blue print shining under the morning light. Something inside me hesitated, but I couldn't place why. She went on almost casually. "Felix can't come, of course. The hotel's having a food festival this weekend. He told me to make sure you relax for once." She said it so naturally that it sounded rehearsed. I glanced at her, searching for cracks in the performance, but she held my gaze calm and perfect. I didn't want to raise suspicion, not when she was watching so closely. So I nodded and said, "That's thoughtful of you." Inside, I felt the faint hum of unease. When the day arrived, the sky was clear and almost too beautiful, the kind of blue that makes people lower their guard. Madeline arrived dressed in a white sundress and oversized sunglasses, dragging a silver suitcase. "You look lovely," she said as she helped me board. The deck gleamed under the sunlight. The coastal dream wasn't large, but it was elegant with polished wood and the scent of salt and citrus in the air. Crew members greeted us politely, as if we were family. From the moment the ship left the dock, Madeline played her role perfectly. She took photos of us leaning on the railing, handed me a drink, and laughed for the camera. "Smile, Mom," she said, wrapping her arm around me as the wind caught our hair. "Healing trip with my beautiful mother-in-law," she announced, her phone pointed at us. The post went live minutes later. I saw the caption flash across her screen, "Healing trip with mom-in-law, family first always." The comments flooded in instantly. Little hearts, compliments, emojis. Her online world adored her. Watching her pose so effortlessly made me feel like I was disappearing again, fading into the background of her perfect illusion. She chatted cheerfully through lunch, asking about my favorite wines, my memories of Charleston, my plans for retirement. Everything about her tone was soft, considerate, but her eyes never matched her words. They were watchful, calculating, as if waiting for the right moment to move a piece on her private chessboard. That night, as the sun sank behind the horizon and the sea turned gold, I stood at the railing, pretending to admire the view. Behind me, I heard her laughter drift through the breeze, light and hollow. And for the first time, I felt certain this trip wasn't about celebration. It was about preparation. Around 10:30 that night, Madeline knocked on my cabin door. Her voice was soft, almost tender. "Come outside, Mom," she said. "You have to see this. The sea at night is pure magic." I hesitated for a moment, then followed her up the narrow staircase to the deck. The sky stretched endlessly above us, jeweled with stars that shimmered against the dark water. The ocean was calm, the kind of calm that makes you forget how quickly it can turn. Madeline leaned on the railing, her hair catching the light from the lanterns. She looked peaceful, radiant even. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said, her tone sweet and steady. A cool wind brushed across my shoulders, and I realized I had forgotten my shawl. "I'll just grab my coat," I murmured, turning toward the stairs. That's when I felt it, a sudden, violent force against my back. No warning, no sound. Just the shock of motion and air rushing past my face before the world vanished into cold. The sea hit me like a wall of knives. Salt filled my mouth and nose as I plunged beneath the surface, disoriented, spinning. I kicked, clawing upward, desperate for air. When I broke through, the night roared around me, wind waves and the faint hum of the ship's engine. I gasped, coughing seawater blinking against the sting. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all, that maybe I had slipped. But then I looked up. The deck lights glowed faintly above, and through the blur of water, I saw her Madeline standing at the railing. Her silhouette was still her white dress, ghost-like against the black sky. And she was smiling. Not a look of fear, not shock or panic, just that calm, perfect smile. She tilted her head slightly, as if admiring her work. Then she stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. The waves dragged me farther from the boat. I screamed, but my voice was lost to the wind. My arms burned, my body numb. Somewhere deep inside, instinct took over. I forced myself to float, to breathe, to stay alive just long enough for the world to realize I hadn't vanished yet. In that freezing darkness, I understood the truth. I had been denying for months the kindness, the sweetness, the carefully arranged smiles. It had all been a mask. Madeline never wanted peace. She wanted freedom. And the easiest way to get it was to erase me. When I woke up, everything was white. The walls, the sheets, even the sound of the waves beyond the window. My body ached as if it had been rebuilt from broken pieces. A man's voice drifted in, steady and warm. "You're safe now," he said. His name was Owen, a fisherman from Hilton Head. He told me he found me floating near a reef at dawn, clinging to a piece of wood. "You were lucky," he said, shaking his head. "Another hour out there, and the tide would have taken you." I tried to speak, but my throat burned. "Where am I?" The words felt foreign, heavy. Owen said he had taken me to a small coastal clinic. They had searched my pockets, but everything was gone: wallet, phone, ID, except for a silver bracelet on my wrist, engraved with 2 letters, CP. He turned it gently under the light, his eyes thoughtful. "You're somebody important, aren't you?" I didn't know how to answer. My head throbbed with fragments. The sound of laughter, the push, the cold. But every time I reached for the memory, it slipped away. The doctor said it was mild trauma and partial amnesia, nothing permanent. But deep down, I knew forgetting wasn't the real danger. Remembering was. A few days later, Owen returned with news. "The Coast Guard's looking into a missing person report," he said carefully. "A woman fell off a yacht near Savannah. Her daughter-in-law claims she was drinking and slipped." My heart froze. Madeline's voice echoed in my mind, calm and calculated. "When she's gone." Owen didn't press for details. He only said, "You can stay here as long as you need." That night, under the flickering light of the clinic's hallway, I made my decision. Camille Prescott would stay lost at sea. I cut my hair short, the kind of cut that makes people look twice and then forget. I signed a local registry under a new name, Mara Prescott. Mara, a name I pulled from the middle of my own, just enough truth to keep me grounded, just enough disguise to keep me alive. Owen helped me find work at a small beach restaurant, the Seabird Cafe. I told the manager I was recovering from memory loss and needed something simple to keep my hands busy. They let me wash dishes, serve tables, and watch the tides come and go. The rhythm of work steadied my breathing. The smell of salt and grilled fish anchored me to something real. Each night, I'd walk along the shore, touching the silver bracelet still on my wrist. The initials, CP, glinted under the moonlight, a reminder that I wasn't gone, just waiting. Somewhere out there, Madeline thought she had erased me, but she had only given me a new name and the time I needed to come back. At first, life as Mara felt like wearing someone else's skin, unfamiliar but strangely freeing. The Seabreeze Diner sat near the marina, always full of chatter and salt air, a place where tourists, yacht owners, and business people came for breakfast or late-night drinks. It was the kind of place where stories floated in with the tide. I told the manager I was looking for steady work, Said I had some experience in hospitality. He looked at me over his glasses and smiled. "You've got the posture of someone who used to be in charge," he said. "We could use that." So I started as a server apron, tied neatly, hair cropped short, smile modest but firm. I kept to myself, listened more than I spoke. People liked that. Within a few weeks, the owner, Mr. Clancy, trusted me enough to handle the morning shifts alone. "You run this floor like clockwork," he'd say, impressed. What he didn't know was that years of managing a restaurant had trained me to notice everything: who lingered too long at the counter, who whispered names they shouldn't, and who paid with a card connected to more than one company. Every night after closing, I would take a newspaper from the front rack, usually the financial section. My hands would tremble just slightly as I unfolded it, eyes scanning for one name: Victor Lang. The man who had appeared in Madeline's dinner photos, the one who gave her that diamond bracelet. A businessman with investments in several coastal properties recently mentioned in connection with a new joint venture in Savannah. Each article I found felt like a breadcrumb leading me closer to the truth. Sometimes I would stare out at the sea, imagining her still smiling somewhere, posting photos of her healing trip while the world believed I was gone. Anger had a sharp taste, but it gave me focus. Revenge, I learned, wasn't about striking back. It was about preparation. The sea outside my window whispered constantly, a sound between warning and promise. I listened to it, steady and patient, waiting for the next wave to turn. It was a Friday afternoon, the kind of golden, slow day, when the air in Seabreeze Diner shimmered with heat and conversation. I was on my usual shift when Clancy, the owner, handed me the reservation slip. "Table 6. Private lunch for 2. Mr. Lang," he said. "High-profile guest. Keep it professional." I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. The name made my pulse stutter. Lang, Victor Lang. I'd seen that name too many times in the business section, and once in a caption under Madeline's smiling face. When they walked in, the entire diner seemed to shift. He arrived first, tall, silver-haired, confident, in that effortless way rich men carry themselves. Then she followed, and for a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. Madeline, wearing a white dress that gleamed like deceit itself, oversized sunglasses perched on her perfect face. She laughed softly at something Victor said, brushing his arm with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. I stood frozen behind the counter, the tray trembling slightly in my hands. So she hadn't wasted any time. The grieving daughter-in-law had turned the tragedy into opportunity. When she slipped off her glasses to order, her eyes swept lazily across the room until they met mine. The moment stretched like glass about to crack. Her smile faltered, froze, then vanished altogether. The color drained from her face. The glass of water in her hand slipped, fell, and shattered against the tile. Victor turned to her, startled. "Madeline?" He asked, his tone sharp with confusion. I took a breath, steady and controlled, and walked toward them. The other diners had gone quiet, the kind of silence that thickens with curiosity. I bent slightly, picking up the shards of glass, then looked up at her. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I said, my voice calm. "Would you like me to bring you more cold water? You look as if you've just seen a ghost." For a second, no one moved. Madeline's lips parted, but no sound came out. Victor's gaze flicked from me to her, searching for an explanation that never arrived. I could almost see the questions forming behind his polished composure. Who was this woman his charming companion suddenly feared? Madeline forced a weak laugh, her hand trembling as she reached for her napkin. I'm fine," she stammered. "Just startled, that's all." But her eyes never left mine. I straightened up, met her gaze, and smiled, the same polite, practiced smile she had once used on me. "Of course," I said softly. "Enjoy your lunch." Then I turned away, leaving her to drown in the silence she had created. Behind me, I could hear Victor's voice low and suspicious. Madeline, who was that woman? Madeline's hand trembled so violently that the napkin slipped from her grasp. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then she forced a laugh, brittle and unconvincing. "Oh, how silly of me," she said, voice shaking. For a second, I thought that waitress looked like my late mother-in-law, but of course that's impossible. The words stumbled out fragile as glass. Her eyes darted toward me again, searching for assurance that I wasn't real, that the ghost she saw was just her imagination. Victor's brow furrowed. "Your late mother-in-law," he repeated slowly. "You mean she's passed away?" His tone was sharp, curious, a little suspicious. Madeline nodded quickly, her smile stretched too tight. "Yes, a terrible accident months ago. She fell off a yacht. It was tragic." The tremor in her voice betrayed her. I stood beside the table, quietly refilling their water glasses, my movements steady, deliberate. The faint clink of ice against glass filled the silence like punctuation. Victor looked up at me briefly, polite, unaware, while I met Madeline's eyes for a single fleeting second. My expression remained calm, but I let a hint of something darker linger, something that said, "I remember everything." As I walked away, I could feel her gaze burning into my back. The laughter that had once come so easily to her was gone. All that remained was shallow breathing and the faint scrape of her fork against the untouched salad. When the meal ended, Victor stood to pay. His usual charm was replaced by quiet thoughtfulness. He approached the counter where Clancy, the manager, stood polishing glasses. "Excuse me, Victor," said his tone casual but measured. "That woman, the one who served us. How long has she been working here?" Clancy glanced towards me at the far end of the room. "Mara." "About 3 months now. Came down from Charleston. Hard worker, keeps to herself." "Charleston." Victor echoed, his eyes narrowing slightly. He nodded, thanked the manager, and turned back toward the table. Madeline was already standing, her purse clutched like a lifeline. "Victor, I'm not feeling well," she said abruptly. "I think I need to go." He studied her face, pale, frantic, unraveling, and something flickered behind his calm exterior. Doubt. "Of course," he said quietly. "Take care of yourself." She left in a rush, heels clattering across the floor, nearly colliding with the door on her way out. The bell above it jingled weakly as she disappeared into the sunlight. Victor remained behind, motionless, staring at the reflection of his glass. The diner's chatter resumed around him, but he didn't hear it. For the first time, the man who thought he'd found the perfect woman began to wonder who or what he had really invited into his life. That night I sat by the small window of my rented room, the ocean murmuring somewhere beyond the dark. The diner had long closed, and the streets were quiet, except for the sound of waves hitting the docks. I opened my notebook, the same one that had carried my thoughts through the months of hiding. On the top of a new page, I wrote carefully, "Day 94 since I was pushed into the sea, the beast has finally smelled its own blood." My hand didn't tremble this time. I felt the weight of calm resolve, the kind that comes not from anger, but from purpose. 2 months earlier, when my strength had begun to return, I had made a call I wasn't sure I'd ever dare to make. Landon Wells, an old acquaintance from the Prescott estate days. He had once been our family attorney, a man of sharp memory and quiet loyalty. It took 3 tries before he answered, his voice careful, almost suspicious. "Who is this?" he asked. "It's Camille," I said softly. "Camille Prescott." There was a long silence, then the sound of him exhaling hard. "That's not possible," he whispered. I told him everything. Not the whole story yet, but enough to make him listen. Later that week, I sent him a handwritten letter, the first I had written in years. Inside it, one question: if I'm not dead, Can I reclaim my legal identity? Landon called me the following day, his tone now composed, but charged with something new, cautious hope. He asked me to meet a contact from his office who could discreetly verify what he needed. A few days later, I pressed my thumb against a small ink pad and onto the corner of an old inheritance file he still had from the Prescott Trust. The ridges matched perfectly. My fingerprints hadn't lied. When he called again, his voice was steady, almost formal. "Mrs. Prescott," he said, as if testing the sound of the name. "If you are indeed alive, we can petition to reopen the missing person case. And if it's proven that someone caused your disappearance intentionally, then we're looking at attempted murder. That's first-degree felony territory." I listened in silence, tracing the rim of my teacup with one finger. For the first time since that night on the yacht, the word justice didn't feel distant. It felt near breathing in the same room. That evening, after hanging up, I sat down to plan. Each detail mattered now, every timeline, every transaction, every name. I no longer needed to shout my truth. All I needed was patience. The tide had already begun to turn, and when it came back in, it would not be mercy that washed ashore, it would be proof. The letter I sent to Landon Wells was written on plain stationery with careful handwriting and no return address. Inside, I wrote only 2 lines. "If you still believe in justice, meet me in Savannah. I'm not dead." A week later, I sat in a small cafe near the river, my back to the window, my hair cropped short, wearing a gray coat that made me look like any other widow trying to disappear. When he finally walked in, I recognized him instantly, the same cautious gait, the same thoughtful eyes behind his glasses. For a moment, he just stood there speechless. "My God," he breathed, his voice almost trembling. "Camille, the whole country thinks you're dead." I looked up from my cup of coffee, my tone calm and even. "Dead people can't demand justice." "Landon," I said. "I can." He sat down slowly, still studying me, as though trying to convince himself I was real. Then he reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folded document, and said quietly, "If you want your name back, there's a process. It's called a certificate of life. It's issued under South Carolina law for people declared missing, but later found alive. It won't be easy. You'll need proof witnesses and your original identification records." "I have my fingerprints, my voice, and the scar from my fall," I said. "That should be enough for now." Over the next few weeks, Landon worked like a man possessed. He reactivated my legal file, retrieved the inheritance documents that Madeline had used to claim my estate, and began drafting the petition to restore my identity. Each time we met, he looked at me not as a ghost, but as a woman rebuilding her own existence, one signature at a time. But paperwork was only the beginning. When he opened his new case folder, the real work began. "Camille," he said one afternoon, laying out several bank statements and property reports. "Madeline has transferred every major asset connected to your name. The Charleston house, the lakefront car, even your savings, all under the claim of inheritance. Some transfers went through offshore accounts." I leaned forward, scanning the papers. "Can we trace them?" He nodded. "Yes. And if we can prove she knew you were alive, those transactions become fraud, criminal fraud. That's how we'll start." I exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar steadiness of control returning. For months, I had lived as someone who merely survived. Now, for the first time, I was preparing to fight. As I left his office that evening, the wind off the river was sharp but clean. Savannah glowed under the sunset, golden and defiant. I pulled my coat tighter and whispered, "You took my name, Madeline. Now I'm taking it back." Landon called me one morning with a tone I hadn't heard from him before, sharp, controlled, and edged with disbelief. "Camille," he said, "you'd better come to my office. You need to see this with your own eyes." When I arrived, he already had a folder laid open on his desk. Inside were several printouts, bank statements, and copies of notarized forms. At the top of the page, in clean digital font, was the name that made my stomach tighten: Prescott Family Renewal Fund. It's a trust account, Landon explained, pointing to the header. Created about 3 months after you were declared deceased. Co-managed by Madeline Fordham, and according to the file, signed and approved by your son, Felix Prescott. I stared at the signature. It looked like his. The same tilt on the F, the same small loop at the end. But something about it felt too perfect, too mechanical. He never signed this, I said quietly. He wouldn't even know how to set up a trust account. Landon nodded grimly. He didn't. The digital record shows the application came through a forged online form. Madeline submitted a copy of your death certificate claiming it was verified by the coroner's office in Charleston. She then transferred $240,000 from your Seaview retirement fund, your entire life savings, into this so-called family renewal fund. My hands gripped the edge of his desk. She stole everything I said, the words tasting bitter. He slid another document toward me. We had a handwriting analyst look at the signature. It's a copy lifted from a scanned tax document Felix signed years ago, then replicated with graphic software and printed onto these forms. It's not even pen pressure, it's pixels. The expert's report was blunt. Signature determined to be an artificial reproduction created through digital manipulation. Federal offense under U.S. Code Section 1028, forgery of legal documentation. Landon closed the folder, his expression set. This isn't just theft, Camille. It's fraud on a federal level, crossing banking lines, falsifying inheritance documents, and impersonating your son's authority. The IRS and the Federal Reserve will want this on record. Once I file it, becomes a criminal case. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. Then I looked up at him and said quietly, "Do it." He nodded. I already have the paperwork ready. The report goes to the IRS Fraud Division tomorrow morning. After that, we'll file with the Federal Banking Oversight Unit. She's not just going to lose the money, she's going to face charges for every forged signature she's ever printed. As I left his office, I could feel my pulse steady. For the first time, the numbers and signatures that Madeline used to destroy me were about to turn against her. The trap she built on paper was now being rewritten line by line into evidence. The first meeting took place on a windy afternoon at a small seaside cafe just outside Savannah. Landon had arranged everything quietly. 3 women, different stories, one common thread. When I arrived, they were already seated at a corner table, their expressions cautious, guarded. Clara Jensen, elegant but weary fingers tapping the rim of her cup. Evelyn Hart, a sharp-eyed accountant who looked like she trusted no one anymore. And Sophia Moore, the youngest, clutching her phone as if it were a shield. For a moment, none of them spoke. They had come because Landon told them there was someone who might help expose Madeline Fordham, but no one expected that someone to be a woman who was supposed to be dead. When I sat down, I saw the flicker of disbelief in their eyes. Clara was the first to speak. "You can't be Camille Prescott," she whispered. "We saw your obituary." "I know," I said calmly, placing my phone on the table. "But the ocean doesn't always keep what it's given." Then I opened the gallery and slid the phone toward them. On the screen was a photo Madeline, in her white dress, laughing beside Victor Lang on the deck of the Coastal Dream. The same smile that once fooled all of us. The women leaned closer. Silent, their faces tightening, as if the truth had a physical weight. Evelyn was the first to break the quiet. "That woman didn't just fool my husband," she said, voice trembling with controlled fury. "She used his name to register a shell company in Charleston. It took me months to trace it, but I found the account, fake invoices, offshore transfers, the works." Landon nodded, sliding his notepad across the table. "That's exactly what we need, proof of a pattern. every document, every transaction. Together, we can build a case that ties her fraud to multiple victims. Once this becomes organized, she can't hide behind charm anymore. Sophia hesitated, then unlocked her phone. "I still have the camera footage from the hotel," she said softly. She didn't know the lobby had motion sensors. Clara reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of printed emails. "And these," she said, "are her promises of joint investments, all signed in the same tone, the same flattery." We sat there for hours, piecing together fragments of deceit, like threads in a net. When the waitress came to refill our coffee, we were no longer strangers, we were co-conspirators. At the end of the meeting, Landon looked around the table and said, "If she used the tides to bury her crimes, then we'll use them to bring her down." I smiled faintly and nodded. Then it settled. From now on, we are the Tides Group. When Landon finally put the files on the table, the name Blue Horizon Project sat there like a threat. He had traced a web of promises and fake paperwork across states and into offshore accounts, and the picture he painted was uglier than anything I had imagined. Blue Horizon Project pretended to be a resort development, a tidy plan of villas, spa facilities, and private docks advertised to investors with glossy images and elaborate projections. On paper, it looked legitimate. In reality, it was a shell, a money-moving mechanism designed to hide payments and launder cash. The legal filings showed Madeline listed as a co-manager for the entity set up in South Carolina, and her email address appeared in communications with Victor Lang and other partners coordinating funding and paperwork. Landon spread contracts that looked official at first glance, but the more we examined them, the more the seams showed. Dates were inconsistent across jurisdictions. Notary stamps were from services that never existed at the addresses listed. The trust documents that claimed authority over my Seaview retirement fund bore signatures that matched the forged forms he had already flagged. Then he opened a folder marked Evidence and played a video taken from a restaurant security camera. I had warned myself not to watch, but when the image filled the screen, I felt my throat close. There they were, Madeline in a white dress laughing with Victor in a private booth under a poster that welcomed new investors. The camera angle changed, and I saw the envelope pushed across the table, the quick hand that handed over cash, then the subtle placing of a folded paper that I recognized at once as a death certificate photocopy. My fingers went numb. The clip showed Victor smiling, congratulating her, and Madeline leaning in and kissing him in front of the banner as if they were celebrating a shared triumph. I sat very still while the footage ran, listening to the unremarkable restaurant sounds and feeling each frame press into me like a thumb. Landon had more. Bank transfers timed to the lunches invoices issued by shell companies created the same week, and a trail of withdrawals leading to accounts in the names of front companies. Clara and Evelyn had supplied emailed confirmations from supposed investors that never existed. Sophia provided the raw camera footage that captured the handoff. We cataloged everything, copying files, noting timestamps, and cross-referencing names and addresses. The pattern was undeniable. This was not isolated greed. It was an organized scheme to extract retirement funds, hide money through phony development projects, and shield the perpetrators behind corporate layers. Landon looked at me and said what I had been thinking but could not voice. "If we release this at the right time," he said, "they will not only lose the money, but also their reputations and their freedom." His voice was steady and full of a hard promise. I felt the tide shift under my feet. The papers that once stole my life had become the instruments by which I would take it back. The morning of the announcement felt like walking into a tide that had been waiting for me. Victor had booked the waterfront room at the Langford, a place where sunlight slips off glass and cameras find faces that want to be known. Reporters set up on tripods assistants whispered about sound checks, and Madeline adjusted Victor's lapel as if they were rehearsing a performance for the world. Landon and I arrived quietly, my hair cut short and silver, my gray dress chosen with the same care I once used to arrange a dining room for guests. We sat near the back, watching the choreography of preparation. When Victor rose to speak about progress and new opportunities, the cameras turned toward him, and the crowd leaned forward hungry for headlines. It was perfected glamour, practiced smiles, the kind of moment that had once erased me from paper and account ledgers. Landon tapped my hand under the table, and in that small pressure, I felt the plan settle into place. His face was steady, the files heavy in his briefcase, like proof waiting to be opened. He had thought of everything. The forged death certificate copied from the shell company file, the bank transfer records that showed the Prescott funds disappearing into opaque accounts, the restaurant video where Madeline accepted an envelope, all reproduced and organized with legal notes beside each entry. He had the certificate of life authenticated through the proper court channels in South Carolina. He had witnesses ready to testify if needed. We were not there to shout or plead. We were there to step into the light at exactly the right moment and let evidence do the speaking. When Victor invited questions and Madeline began to recount how important transparency and trust are in business, Landon stood and walked toward the podium with the deliberate slowness of someone who knows the weight of timing. I rose with him because the audience needed to see a face with a story behind it. As I moved forward, I felt the press of lenses and felt old nerves, those precise nerves I had learned to steady under high heat orders and dinner rushes. I paused a breath before the microphone and let the room adjust to my presence. I did not raise my voice. I only said that I was present to correct records and to ask for the truth to be acknowledged. The words were simple and clear. Cameras zoomed. Murmurs swelled into a buzz that spread outward. Faces I had once known as strangers leaned closer. Madeline froze beside Victor, her jaw paling. Victor stared at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before. The organizers called for order, and Landon unfolded the stack of documents. He presented the certificate of life, then the forensic report showing the forged signature, then the video time-stamped to the lunch where the envelope exchanged hands. The reporters had their pens ready. The broadcast went live across the city. I watched as the glossy mask Madeline had worn for months began to crack, tiny fissures appearing under the pressure of fact. I remembered then why I had chosen this life of careful plotting rather than frantic accusation. I had not come to demand pity. I had come to reclaim my name, to let the truth properly placed and timed finish the sentence I could not speak alone. That morning, the headlines were everywhere. Glossy photos of Victor Lang shaking hands, smiling beneath banners that read, "Blue Horizon Project, the future of Southern Shores." Every local station broadcast the event as if it were the dawn of a new era. By the time I arrived near Marina Hall, the front steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and investors in tailored suits. Inside, the air smelled of salt perfume and ambition. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. On stage, Victor Lang stood beside Madeline, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder as though presenting a prize. She looked radiant in a cream-colored suit, her smile practiced and wide, her eyes bright with the confidence of someone who believed the world would always believe her. When she began to speak, her voice carried through the hall with the smooth cadence of a woman who had learned to lie gracefully. Blue Horizon, she said, was born from a vision of trust, renewal, and integrity. Together, we are building something that will outlast us all. Her words rippled through the room, polished and hollow. At the back of the hall, Landon leaned toward me and whispered, "Integrity, huh?" His tone carried a faint, incredulous laugh. I didn't answer. I just fixed my gaze on the stage on the woman who had stolen my name and nearly my life, and I waited. Victor took the microphone next his charm, as smooth as his suit. "We are honored to have each of you here today," he announced. "In a few moments, our investors will have the chance to sign partnership contracts and officially join the Blue Horizon family." The applause swelled, the camera lights flared, and Madeline turned to beam at him. Perfect, composed, untouchable. Then the sound came, a door opening at the far end of the hall, quiet but unmistakable. Heads turned. For a heartbeat, everything froze. I stepped through the entrance, the light from the chandeliers catching on my silver hair. The noise of the room fell away into silence. Landon walked beside me, holding a leather folder, and behind us 2 uniformed officers from the Coast Guard followed, their presence a silent verdict. Madeline's smile faltered first. Victor looked confused, glancing from me to the cameras, unsure whether this was part of the show. I could hear the shutters clicking again, faster now, frantic. Landon spoke clearly, his voice steady and deliberate. "Good morning. My name is Landon Wells, attorney of record for Mrs. Camille Prescott," the woman standing beside me. The same Camille Prescott whose death certificate was used to establish this project. Gasps rippled through the audience. A reporter dropped his pen. Madeline's hand trembled around the microphone. "This is absurd," she managed to say, her voice suddenly thin. I took one step forward, my heels sharp against the marble. "You're right," I said softly. "It is absurd pretending the dead can't speak. Unfortunately for you, I can." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouting flashes, blinding Victor's composure, shattering as officers stepped forward. I didn't look at her again. I didn't need to. For once, the world was seeing what I had seen all along. The first flash went off before anyone could even process what they were seeing. Then another and another, until the room filled with the blinding rhythm of cameras. Reporters scrambled from their seats, voices rising in disbelief that rolled through the hall like a wave. "Is that? It can't be. That's Camille Prescott. But she's dead," someone shouted. The words spread from mouth to mouth, echoing against the marble walls. For a heartbeat, time seemed to fold in on itself. A ghost had walked into the living world, and the living didn't know how to breathe. I didn't rush. I walked down the aisle with calm, steady steps, my heels clicking softly against the floor, each sound deliberate. The lights reflected off my silver hair, making it shine beneath the chandeliers. I could feel every gaze fixed on me, but I only looked in one direction, toward her. Madeline. Her painted smile had already vanished. I stopped a few feet away from the stage, looked her directly in the eyes, and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the noise. "It seems," I said slowly, "I should thank you for the free trip to the bottom of the ocean." The hall fell silent for a moment, the words hanging in the air like a blade suspended by a thread. Madeline's face went white. Her lips trembled. She stumbled backward, the chair behind her tipping and crashing loudly to the floor. The sound broke whatever composure she had left. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." Her hands shook as she reached for the table, but even the glass of water slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor. Victor stood frozen beside her, his mouth slightly open, the color draining from his face. The cameras turned toward him, the room now a storm of flashes. He looked from me to Madeline, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You told me she fell into the ocean and never came back up," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. That single sentence ignited the room. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions over one another, microphones thrust in every direction. "Mr. Lang, are you saying there was deception involved? Mrs. Fordham? How do you explain this?" The chaos became symphonic, the whir of cameras, the clatter of chairs, the stunned gasps of investors who had once toasted to her transparency. Madeline's knees seemed to buckle. She shook her head, eyes darting wildly between me and Victor, searching for a lie that could still save her. But there were too many witnesses now, too many eyes that had seen her truth collapse. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. Standing there, I could feel the shift in the air, the slow, unstoppable turn of justice, finding its voice at last. Landon stepped forward to the podium with a composure that silenced the chaos, his voice clear and deliberate cut through the noise of cameras and whispers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, holding up a stamped legal document for everyone to see. "This is the certificate of life issued by the Charleston County Court, officially confirming that Mrs. Camille Prescott is alive. And this," he lifted another sheet, his tone firm, "is the falsified death certificate that Ms. Madeline Fordham submitted to the bank to gain access to her estate." The room gasped in unison. Flash after flash went off, capturing every paper, every gesture. Landon's professionalism was almost surgical. He spread the documents across the press table so that the front row could see them, the fake certificate, the notarization stamp that didn't match any county records, and the forged digital signature. These records, he continued, were used to transfer ownership of the Prescott family assets and to establish the fraudulent trust known as the Prescott Family Renewal Fund. He turned another page, revealing a set of printed photos and a video still. "And this," he said, his tone dropping lower, "is footage from the yacht's security camera the night Mrs. Prescott disappeared." The image appeared on the large projector screen behind him, a blurred yet unmistakable frame of Madeline standing behind Camille on the deck, her hand reaching forward just before Camille vanished into the dark waves. Gasps turned to shouts. Reporters surged closer, microphones thrust forward. Landon raised one final folder, flipping it open for the cameras. "We also have evidence of forged property transfer documents bearing the simulated signature of Mr. Felix Prescott and bank statements tracing $240,000 withdrawn through a fake trust account, all under the control of Ms. Fordham." At that moment, the two Coast Guard officers stepped forward through the crowd, their presence calm but commanding. One of them spoke clearly into the microphone, his voice amplified across the room. "Ms. Madeline Fordham, you are under arrest for financial fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy to commit attempted homicide. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Madeline's body stiffened. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked from the officers to the cameras to Victor, her face a pale mask of disbelief. The flashlights caught the shimmer of sweat on her temples as one officer gently but firmly took her arm. Victor Lang tried to remain composed, his jaw tight, his hand gripping the edge of the podium. But then one of the officers turned toward him holding a printed sheet. "Mr. Lang," he said evenly, "we have internal emails linking you directly to the Blue Horizon Project's offshore transactions." The line of text glowed on the screen behind them, his own words about redirecting funds discreetly. For a long moment, Victor said nothing. Then slowly, he dropped the microphone. The thud echoed through the silent hall louder than any confession could have been. Madeline's voice broke first. "I thought she was dead," she screamed, her words echoing through the microphones and bouncing off the glass walls of Marina Hall. "I only wanted to protect my husband's assets." Her tone cracked halfway through the sentence, trembling between panic and desperation. The crowd surged forward, journalists shouting questions that drowned her out. The perfect, polished image she had crafted for years was collapsing in real time under the flash of every camera, every lens pointed like a mirror reflecting her deceit. She tried to keep talking, but the words fell apart in her mouth. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't mean to." Her breath hitched the tears smearing her makeup into gray streaks. The microphones, cold and merciless, caught every sound of her unraveling. Somewhere in the chaos, someone shouted, "Show the footage!" Within seconds, the projector came alive on the main wall. The room dimmed as the video began to play. The image was grainy but unmistakable. The deck of the yacht rocking under the moonlight, Camille standing near the railing, the sea glimmering behind her. Madeline's figure appeared behind her, calm, calculated. A single hand touched Camille's shoulder, then a push. The crowd gasped, the sound collective and sharp, like a single inhale that filled the room. The video froze on that moment, the frame showing Madeline's face caught between anger and satisfaction. Flashbulbs erupted again. Reporters shouted questions that no one could answer. Madeline covered her face with shaking hands, stumbling backward as officers moved closer. Her sobs filled the silence that followed a high, broken sound. Victor stood beside her silent, his expression hollow. When the cuffs locked around his wrists, he didn't resist. His head dropped low. His shoulders slumped as if he'd aged 20 years in an instant. The cameras zoomed in, one on Madeline's tear-streaked face, another on Victor's bowed head. The contrast was brutal. The once celebrated couple now exposed as partners in greed, trapped in the glare of the very spotlight they had courted. The reporters didn't look away. They recorded every fragment of humiliation, every glimmer of karma made visible. Madeline collapsed to her knees, her designer heels slipping on the polished marble, her mascara mixing with tears and foundation. The sight was almost surreal beauty melting into guilt ambition, collapsing into dust. An officer reached down to lift her, his hand steady but detached. Landon stood beside me, watching quietly. Justice finally found its voice, he said, almost to himself. I looked at the scene, the chaos, the flashes, the truth no longer hidden, and whispered, "No, Landon, this isn't justice yet. This is truth finally learning to speak." Felix entered the hall just as the chaos reached its peak, the shouts of reporters, the flash of cameras, the echo of handcuffs snapping shut. A police officer had called him in for questioning, but he never imagined walking into this storm. When his eyes found me standing near the podium, everything around him seemed to fade. His breath caught. For a moment, he didn't move. Then in a trembling voice that barely escaped his throat, he whispered, "Mom." The single word silenced the room more effectively than any command. Reporters lowered their cameras. Even the officers paused. Felix's face went pale as the truth sank in. The mother he had buried, mourned, and spoken to in prayers was standing there alive. Tears gathered quickly, his hands shaking as he stumbled forward. "I thought you were gone," he said, his voice breaking. "They told me." I believed them. I stepped closer, studying the son I had once known, the boy who had once been so gentle, now hollowed by guilt and disbelief. My hand rose on its own, brushing his cheek, the warmth of his skin grounding me back to life. "You didn't lose me, Felix," I said softly. "You only lost yourself when you trusted the wrong person." The words hit him harder than any slap could. His knees buckled and he fell in front of me, tears spilling freely as his shoulders shook. "I'm sorry, Mom," he cried. "I should have listened. I should have seen it. I let her use me against you." My heart ached, not with anger, but with a grief too deep to name. I placed my hand on his hair, steady and forgiving. "You were blinded by love, not malice," I whispered. "What matters is that you see clearly now." Around us, the crowd had gone still. The reporters, moments ago hungry for scandal, now stood in silence. Some lowered their cameras, some discreetly wiped their eyes. Even the harsh fluorescent lights seemed to soften. The image, a son on his knees before his mother, a mother's hand resting gently on his head, carried more weight than any courtroom verdict. It was not revenge that filled the air, but something purer redemption. Landon stood quietly to the side, watching without speaking. The officers waited, giving space for the human moment to finish before duty resumed. The hall smelled faintly of salt and tears, the same scent that had once clung to me when I washed ashore half dead and half alive. The next morning, the newspapers would tell the story in their own way. On the front page, beneath a still frame of Felix holding me as I steadied him, the headline read, "A Mother Rises from the Sea, the Fall of the Blue Horizon Queen." But for me, no headline could capture what truly happened. Not a fall, not a triumph, just a mother and her son finding their way back to truth. The courtroom lights were cold, sterile, almost merciless, the kind of light that made every truth impossible to hide. Madeline sat motionless beside her lawyer. Her wrists restrained, her once perfect hair limp against her shoulders. Across the aisle, Victor Lang avoided her gaze, his face ashen, the sharp arrogance that once defined him, now dissolved into quiet defeat. When the judge read the verdict guilty of financial fraud and conspiracy to commit attempted murder, the words echoed like a final tolling bell. There was no outburst, no plea, only silence, heavy and absolute. The handcuffs clicked shut around Madeline's wrists as the bailiff led her away. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered about the fallen queen of luxury, her name now forever tied to greed and betrayal. Even those who once praised her beauty now used her as a warning, a reminder that charm without conscience is poison. Victor's sentence came next year's in federal prison for laundering money through offshore accounts under the Blue Horizon Project. He lowered his head, whispering something that sounded like regret, though no one could hear him over the rustle of papers and the low murmur of the courtroom. When he was escorted out, he didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of salt and rain. Reporters swarmed around me, shouting questions, cameras flashing like lightning. I didn't stop to answer. I had already said everything I needed to. The law had spoken. The rest was noise. In the following weeks, my assets were restored under my legal name, Camille Prescott. Landon handled every step with precision, ensuring every fraudulent document was nullified. My house by the shore was once again mine, though it felt different now, quieter, as if the walls themselves needed time to heal. Felix filed for divorce soon after the trial. He left his position at the restaurant saying he needed to breathe to take care of me, and perhaps to rebuild himself too. One afternoon, as we sat by the porch watching the waves roll in, Landon visited with the final set of documents. "It's all over now," he said gently, sliding the papers across the table. "But remember, Camille, justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about standing back up." I nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. "I know," I replied softly, "because I didn't rise for vengeance. I rose to live again." The newspapers called it the Miracle Widow case, the story of a mother who came back from death to expose deceit. For weeks, my picture appeared beside headlines about redemption, resilience, and karma. And somewhere behind bars, Madeline watched as every bridge she'd built burned down. Her former lovers turned against her, filing claims, revealing her lies. No one defended her now. Karma had done what I never needed to. It made her face herself, the only prison that lasts forever. The restaurant was small, nestled between two weathered cottages overlooking the Atlantic. The sign above the door shimmered softly in the sea breeze, "The tide always returns." It had been carved by Felix himself, the words chosen by me. Every morning when the sun rose and its light danced on the waves, those words caught the glow and seemed to breathe. Inside, the scent of freshly baked bread and roasted herbs filled the air. Felix worked quietly in the kitchen, focused but calm. his hands steady over the cutting board. The same hands that once trembled with guilt now moved with purpose. I watched him through the glass window, dividing the dining room from the kitchen, a quiet pride swelling in my chest. We didn't need grand openings or news cameras anymore. What we built this time was peace, simple, honest, and earned. I kept a corner table by the window where the sea was always visible. Every afternoon after lunch service, I would sit there with my journal writing as the tide rolled in. Today, the page read, "I once thought revenge was an ending, but it was never about ending anything. It was about finding my way back to myself." I underlined the last sentence, feeling its truth settle inside me like the calm after a long storm. The bell on the door jingled softly. When I looked up, Landon stood there still in his gray suit, holding a folded newspaper. His smile carried that same mix of gravity and warmth that had guided me through the storm months ago. He placed the paper on the table. The headline read, "Blue Horizon Scandal. Justice Served." "It's done," he said. "The case is closed. Justice has found its way, Mrs. Prescott." I looked at the headline for a long moment before lifting my gaze toward the window. Outside, the sea shimmered under the late afternoon light, calm but endless. "No one truly sinks," I said softly, "as long as they remember how to swim with faith." Landon nodded, his eyes reflecting both pride and quiet respect. Felix came out a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a towel, smiling shyly. "Table for one more counselor?" he asked, and Landon chuckled. For the first time in years, laughter filled the place without an edge of pain behind it. As the sun began to dip, the ocean turned gold, and the restaurant glowed in its reflection. I closed my journal, feeling the tide's rhythm steady and familiar. Survival, I had learned, wasn't about staying afloat. It was about learning to rise again, no matter how many times the waves pulled you under. If you've ever been betrayed, don't stay silent. Share your story. Because sometimes justice begins not with revenge, but with one person brave enough to survive.